Hi, everyone. This is Randy Morse, the Communications Director for the BC Rural Centre. Before we get rolling on today's webinar, we just want to do a little bit of technology checking. I believe one of our presenters has a PowerPoint, and I want to be sure that we're going to be able to see it. So, Zach, if you can play around with that, I'm going to do the following. Hello, Zach. Hello, Jean-Marc. So, Zach, there we go. Beautiful. Perfect. Okay, that's excellent. So let's get out of that now, Zach. Okay. I believe we're ready to go. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the BC Rural Centre's webinar on rural innovation and youth attraction. My name is Randy Morse. As I said, I'm the Communications Director for the BC Rural Centre. I'm delighted to have you join us. We have folks registered from across Western Canada and as far afield in the US as the great states of Minnesota and New Mexico. So welcome to all of you. The BC Rural Centre is an organization dedicated to helping rural communities and First Nations succeed. It's that simple. We're an excellent ongoing source of information of importance to rural stakeholders, and I hope that all of you will avail yourselves to visit our website at www.bcruralcentre, spelled the Canadian way, CENTRE.org. Sign up for our e-newsletter, which comes out every month. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. So just a few housekeeping items. Again, we have two outstanding presenters today. Because we're polite Canadians, we're going to begin by inviting our American guest to start, and then he will be followed by our Canadian presenter. We're going to make sure that there's some time at the end of this so that any questions that you might have can be posed to one or both of our presenters. When it comes to questions, just use your chat function. You should all have a chat function on your screens. You can type in questions, I'll see them, and then I'll be sure to pose them as we move along, or at the very least at the end of today's webinar to our two presenters. The webinar is going to take roughly 60 minutes. We won't be completely strict about that. If there are some questions, I'm sure both Zach and Jean-Marc would be willing to stay a bit longer and answer those questions. So, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter.
It's great that we have organizations like the BC Rural Centre, a part of the ecosystem to help rural and remote communities succeed. I've been living in the northern communities now for about 10 years, from the big city of Toronto, and decided to move out to the mountains, much like a lot of other young people did, to see the birth of a brand new ski resort called Revelstoke Mountain Resort. And it was also a very exciting time to pioneer the next phase of a community. And I think that's what everybody does, especially millennials, when seeking out new ways of living. It's some of the bigger cities these days are difficult to get balance in life. And 10 years later, I can say the same thing about living out in rural and remote communities, trying to find balance in life, where you can have a good, healthy dose of exercise, of peace, and of rewarding work. So I've been in the web business now for over 20 years. I got my start in Ottawa building the first Government of Canada websites by hand in HTML. And it was back then where I fully understood that it was the internet that is going to allow us as people to be able to operate wherever we'd like in the world, free from the constraints of the machine, so to speak. The machine back then was very much organizations that said, you need to do something this way, and that's just the way it's always been. The machine these days are obviously the internet, which is now transforming into the next version of technologies, including blockchain and AI. So in my experience, I have jumped from government to focus on online travel for years. And the reason why is because, again, it was a really rewarding product to be able to move people around in a much more powerful way. I worked for companies like Expedia, built a little website called westjet.com, and eventually a startup called Jump On, which attempted to be the Uber of the skies. Millennials loved this product. It was unique, it was personalized. We got to crowdsource destinations based on voting. So it wasn't just this boardroom of management locked up, hold with different cities trying to assess where planes should go. It was actually decided using the internet and the power of young people voting where these planes would fly, way ahead of its time. But again, it was one of these things that you could do on the internet without a terrible amount of capital, although that in the end is what kept the product from scaling greatly. So in my adventure, let's call it, I jumped from Jump On to Seedups, which I currently am a director of. It's an equity crowdfunding platform. And Jump On was the first company in North America to raise capital in the brand new way called the internet. And equity crowdfunding was the game. It's still very much alive. So we connect entrepreneurs and investors online and ensure a smooth securities transaction and document management for the companies. Seedups is very much bobbing and weaving with the securities regulators. But in the end, what we're looking at doing is targeting people within specific geographies and allowing them to invest in local business. This is what we see is the most important thing. So back to BC Rural Centre, they are also active proponents of the Regional Investment Co-op, which the Kootenays has just launched. And the Regional Investment Co-op is a way in which communities can crowdsource capital and put that in the hands of local startups. Really neat. Again, a big pillar is moving capital with these new mechanisms, whether it's equity crowdfunding or investment co-ops. Living out in rural remote, another key pillar is moving information with fiber and smart cities technologies. And probably just as important, the next wave of attention is moving people around with electric vehicle share and ultimately autonomous transport. So in my world, as I got started with the internet, it was very obvious that the key to ensuring success of humanity, first of all, is just moving things around better, which is what the initiation of the internet allowed us to do. And now fiber being plugged into a lot of our communities around the world. And now more people latching onto what the smart cities movement is, whether it's open data, open government, citizen engagement. It's moving this information around where it once was locked up. It was locked in a boardroom. It was locked in a government department or locked in somebody's head. And so this free flow of information with fiber and ultimately smart cities technology, the free flow of capital, finally unlocking local capital where you don't put it into the hands of some registered savings plan in a faraway company and unlock tens of millions of dollars in local capital for local startups that are meaningful, your neighbors, your friends, your family. And then ultimately, this next wave of electric vehicles that are going to hit us hard are going to physically move us around. These are the three major pillars for local innovation, and I believe a lot of millennial attraction. So the platform that doesn't exist today, that millennials are very keen on, that we all are as humans very keen on, and onwards. 50% of the world's population is under the age of 30. This is the highest youth population in history. The millennial generation views climate change and conflict as the most critical issues we face. So once we get these three pillars moving along, how are we actually addressing what they find as being important, what we know is being important, even though we were programmed in a different age and in a different mindset? How are we attending to those needs? They are finding, millennials are finding that their voice is not heard. They're not going out to vote. No kidding. They don't want to vote for a human that has bias that's been programmed in yesteryear. They want to vote with their peers. They want to vote in a medium that they're comfortable with. And so we have to build these platforms in our smart cities to allow millennials and people as a whole to bind around the issues that matter, so that in a real-time format, they can, wherever they are with their friends, be able to enunciate and weigh in on these issues that matter, whether it's a solution or a connection to another individual, whether it's in their community or somewhere very far away that's come up with an ingenious solution to a local problem. So what it comes down to is that collaboration, online collaboration. Specifically, if we set up these pillars, these foundations, then we need to build that layer of smart city technology to allow for that online collaboration. So let's start with the question also of entrepreneurship. The majority of young people are optimistic about the impact of technology and innovation. So 80% think technology is creating jobs as opposed to destroying jobs, which is a really powerful thing to understand. They're super keen on it. However, technology alone can't address the alarming reality of 71 million employed. There's 15 to 24-year-olds around the 15 to 24-year-old around the globe. This is close to a historic peak of 13%, according to the International Labor Organization. So unleashing the potential of entrepreneurship is not simple. When taking action to cut red tape, remove structural barriers, or alleviate the social ones, we can't fall in the trap of one size fits all with this approach to innovation. In fact, the pursuit of innovation for its own sake is not the answer to the challenge of youth and employment. So many projects to stimulate entrepreneurship have failed because they have attempted to replicate, Silicon Valley, and when in all reality, Silicon Valley can't be replicated. So even with generous government grants and tax benefits, ambitious attempts to create new tech hubs, just like London's tech city, has failed to deliver up to expectations. To put it in perspective, Facebook, which was founded in 2004, is now worth twice as much as 40 European unicorn startups. So if our mission is to reduce youth unemployment and social conflicts, then a better strategy would be to play the strengths of particular regions with solutions tailored to local needs. So the emphasis is less on pure innovation, but on supporting those who have the skills, but not the financial resources to launch their own business. The funding mechanism traditionally is divided into two components designed to meet the growing demands of each startup. In-kind grants will fund upfront expenses, while no-interest loans and investment co-ops will cover recurring expenses until startup becomes self-reliant. So by identifying young people with business skills in remote areas who need a leg up, the The initiative can provide the type of opportunities that can reduce the allure of militant groups, or in many cases are attractive for purely economic rather than ideological reasons. Our efforts to give millennials what they should be measured against two questions articulated by tomorrow's leaders. Firstly, does it make a positive and social environmental impact with inclusive solutions tailored to local needs and enough opportunities to build resilience in young people against radicalization? And secondly, does it fall into the same entrepreneurship and innovation traps which have derailed previous attempts to expand the positive impacts of the fourth industrial revolution, which includes supercomputing, robots, self-driving cars, brain interfaces, all of which are happening at a growth of exponential rates. We already have many solutions at our fingertips. It should be every organization's challenge to empower the generation who want to make a difference and to do so quickly. So the keys to these entrepreneurship tools, we believe, exist online. There are only so many humans to coach so many humans, and we need to give millennials the keys to drive their entrepreneurship journey, to drive community development, to drive global change on their own. And we need to get them off of the current technology of which youth culture has been seriously wasting away on the predecessors, which include Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. This is consuming a large amount of youth time, and we need to give them the new platforms that will allow them to be empowered with entrepreneurship, fed with local capital, and ultimately connect with those in their regions and around the world with much more effective and less dangerous transportation. And that's it.
Okay, thanks very much, Jean-Marc. Interesting commentary. I'm sure we're going to have some questions at the end of this. And I'm hoping that now Zach has managed to figure out the intricacies of his recalcitrant computers. Let's go to Iowa and Zach Mannheimer. Zach, how are we doing?
I think we're okay. We shall find out. But great. Jean-Marc, great presentation. So I can't agree more with everything Jean-Marc said. In fact, this works really well with what I'm going to talk about. So let me try to share my screen and hope this works. Here it comes. Did that work there? Okay. So.
Yeah, so far so good.
Okay, and I can move my slides. All right.
Perfect.
Can you see Pennsylvania?
Yes, we can. Bucks County is fully present.
Okay, so here we go. So I'm the principal community placemaker at McClure. I work for an engineering company. I am not an engineer, so don't ask me any engineering questions. But I am a placemaker, and I run the department of placemaking here at McClure. Just a little bit about myself. I came from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, as you see here, small town called New Hope, about 2,500 people. When I grew up, it was rural, and by the time I graduated high school, it got sucked into the Philadelphia metro, and it became suburban. And I never really wanted to see that happen again. That's the work that I do now. I was a theater and philosophy major in college, so I had absolutely no job prospects when I graduated. When I graduated school, I moved to London. I did theater over there for a couple of years. My visa expired. I came back to the States, and I did what every other theater person does. I went to New York, and my screen has decided to stop sharing. Wow. Okay, so I think, can you still hear me, Randy?
Yes, absolutely, loudly and clearly.
Okay, we're going to skip the slick presentation I have, and I'm just going to tell you about what I do. So I originally grew up on the East Coast. I moved to Iowa about 11 years ago, but I lived in New York City for about 10 years in Brooklyn doing theater and running restaurants. And I quickly realized the last thing New York needed was another theater or another restaurant. I also looked around myself in Brooklyn and realized that I was completely in a bubble. Everyone around me looked like me, thought like me, acted like me, ate like me, and I didn't think that that was very healthy, either as a human or as an artist. And I knew I wanted to leave, but I wasn't sure where I wanted to go. So in the summer of 2007, I did a ridiculous road trip across America. I visited 22 cities around the country. I spent 3 to 5 days in each city. I was looking for a city that had roughly 500,000 people in the metro, a city that had a downtown that needed to be revitalized, a city that struggled attracting and retaining the next generation of workforce, a city that had an art scene that was burgeoning but not yet established nationally, and a city that was as close to 50-50 politically as I could find. And Des Moines, Iowa checked all my boxes. And I never thought that I would live in Iowa. I didn't know anybody in the state of Iowa at the time. And in the fall of 2007, I moved to Iowa. So I've been here a little over 11 years. And now I've got a wonderful wife and 3 kids. And that's what happens when you move to the Midwest of America.
Zach, excuse me. Sorry to interrupt. Could you please turn off your screen share so that we can see you rather than Bucks County? It's a beautiful place.
It is.
And we all love seeing George Washington crossing the Potomac, but it would be better if we could see you.
I would love to. I cannot unless I shut down my computer.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah, that's what happened last time. So,
all right, fair enough.
Give me 3 minutes. I can do that.
No, that's okay. Carry on.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I've been in Iowa 11 years. The reason I moved here was to start the Des Moines Social Club. The Social Club is a nonprofit arts and education center based in downtown Des Moines. We purchased an old 1937 Art Deco firehouse from the city of Des Moines, and we turned it into the Social Club. Today, the Social Club serves over 300,000 people a year. It produces over 800 artistic events every year in every artistic discipline. Inside, there's a full 7,000 square foot restaurant and a coffee shop and comic book store that serve as tenants inside the space. We have a local art gallery. We have offices for other nonprofits. We have a full-scale culinary school, a sound recording studio, a circus academy room, and 3 classrooms for dance and movement and visual arts. We have a 5,000 square foot black box theater, a live music venue, and an outdoor space. That produces about 800 events a year. The way that we figured out how to create it, we didn't always have the the firehouse that we have now. Once upon a time, we had a crappy little building in downtown Des Moines that was held together by dirt in an area that was completely undeveloped. We got a 1-year lease on that building, and the goal of the Social Club was, how do you build community through the arts? And that's pretty much the goal of every nonprofit arts-based organization in the world. So we didn't quite know how to do it. We just knew that we wanted to. And so we opened our doors. We had a makeshift theater, a makeshift bar, a makeshift gallery, and a classroom. And we started doing shows. And the first group that ever came to rent our theater was a group called 3X Wrestling. And they do WWE style wrestling events. And as you might imagine, there are very specific types of people who come to see wrestling. At the same time, completely coincidentally in the bar, we booked a jazz and poetry night. And as you might imagine, there are specific types of people to come see that. These 2 worlds would never be caught dead socializing together. And that's exactly what happened. And so the first night, both groups came together. And the second night, the third.
Okay, Zach, we've lost you all of a sudden. Just as we were reaching the exciting wrestling segment of your presentation. This is maddening. Well, look, I'm going to assume that Zach can hear us and that he's got a technical glitch there. So, Jean-Marc, let me just go to you for a moment. We've got a question from one of our attendees asking, he's saying he's guessing that Facebook, Instagram, etc. is being used mostly for social activity, not necessarily for entrepreneurial purposes. Is that the case? And are the platforms that you were alluding to, the new platforms, something that will address that?
Yeah, so these existing platforms evolved out of the very first generation of the internet, and it's difficult because these days people, especially in our smaller communities, are saying, "Oh, we're anti-technology, and we got to unplug and get away from it." But what they're saying is actually, with the supercomputer in their pocket, they're accessing some older tools that have led them down a certain path. And we, as creatures that are find it quite difficult to make changes, and specifically in Canada land here, we're a little bit more risk averse. We get into using these tools, and we know for a fact that in smaller communities, actually, we got addicted to Facebook. In fact, they are the largest source of communication, and as we know, that billionaires are really using these tools to harvest a lot of data, and then ultimately spoon feeding us in a bit of an echo chamber and a feedback loop. And so it is version 1. It was great. Social media is super powerful. Yeah, it's used for social reasons, but the bleed into business is obvious. It's a big source of business activities. And in fact, when people are going to read more about what they need out of life, they're going to Facebook, and then they go to some media outlets, and they go to various other major media information that is ultimately using these major social media outlets to repurpose the information. So yeah, there is a new wave. It may include technologies such as the blockchain, ultimately artificial intelligence, but these are the tools that need to evolve, just like any other tool in life from fire onwards. And Zach is back here.
Yeah, let's see if we can bring up Zach now.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not even going to attempt to bring up the slideshow.
Okay, that's perfect, Zach. Carry on.
Cool.
I'm very sorry. John-Marc, thanks for covering.
It's all good.
So I'll just get to the heart of this. What the work that we do now is in rural creative placemaking. Our belief is that rural communities, and when I say rural, we define it as 50,000 people or less. A lot of people define it in other ways, but the majority of the communities we work in are 10,000 people or less. Most communities are about 1,000 to 2,000 people. We do work in 15 states and in Canada at the moment. We're only in one province in Canada, in Manitoba, but hopefully we'll be in more soon. The work that our belief is that these are the communities that are going to grow. If you track net migration of the coasts of both of our countries, or rather big cities, these cities today are completely oversaturated. A lot of people that live in those cities came from smaller communities, typically in the Midwest. They moved out there seeking fame or fortune. Many of them have chosen to stay, but when they get to their 30s or their late 20s, early 30s, they're being pushed out. These cities are now oversaturated, and they're moving, and they are moving, and we know where they're going. The last 10 to 15 years in America, they've gone to Minneapolis, Kansas City, Nashville, Austin, and Denver. Today, those cities are all oversaturated. And my definition of oversaturation is, can you find a affordable apartment in downtown? In those cities, you cannot. And so the cities that are seeing this growth now are places like Des Moines, Iowa, Boise, Idaho, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Birmingham, Alabama, Little Rock, Arkansas, these types of places. A good example of this in Canada is Winnipeg. Winnipeg is growing dramatically right now. And it's because a lot of the other larger cities that are somewhat nearby are oversaturated. So people are moving to these other areas. If this keeps moving at this pace with technology and a lot of the things that Jean-Marc was talking about, especially with autonomous vehicles, if this continues, our belief is by 2030, places like Winnipeg and Des Moines will be oversaturated. And that's a incredible thought if that could happen. And if that's true, the last places left to really populate are rural communities. It'll start with the micropolitan areas, the towns of 50 to 100,000 people, but it'll quickly move on down. as Jean-Marc was talking about fiber, and if we're able to get that everywhere, which we will probably in the next 10 years, these things are going to change dramatically. You're going to see people working and living in many different places at the same time. So the work that we do, we believe that these communities will only grow. These smaller communities of 10,000 people or less are only going to grow if they have the amenities that the next generation of workforce is looking for. The challenge is, how do you build those amenities without alienating folks who have lived there for most of their lives? And these amenities tend to be the number one amenity everywhere, always, is housing. There's a housing shortage in every rural community in America, and I believe in Canada, although I haven't done enough research there. We've only just started recently working in Manitoba. But every rural community in America has a housing shortage. And this is largely because the cost of building goes up every year. So you have to import, the trades have left, the people to build the houses have moved to urban areas. You got to import them in, which costs more. Then you add in the issue of having little to no amenities in these communities. And the biggest problem is the cost to build a home today, a 3-bedroom home in American dollars, is an average of $185,000. The average home in rural America's value today is $72,000. There's a huge delta that needs to be met. When you think about rental properties, which is what most millennials want when they're looking to move to a small or any location, in rural America, modern rental properties typically don't exist. And that's because if you're going to build new modern apartments, you're going to have to charge on average $950 for a 1-bedroom. In most of these communities, nobody's going to pay anything close to that, typically not even above $600. So there's another huge gap there that we have to figure out how to get past. On top of that, they want modern amenities. They want cultural centers, live music venues, coffee shops, restaurants, breweries, nice trails and recreation, downtown retail. All of these things are what people of any age are looking for, especially millennials, of where they want to live and how they want to, where they choose to live their lives and where they want to work. They're only going to move to these communities if those communities have those amenities. What our group does is we come in and we build those amenities. We figure out what those things are that these communities need. We do that through visioning sessions. We vet these things out financially with the community. So if it's a cultural center and a live music venue and a new restaurant that they want in an older building that seems to be vacant sitting in downtown, we figure out how to acquire the property. We create a business model for all of those things, whether for-profit or nonprofit. We vet it out to see if it works financially. We then figure out what the capital cost is going to be to redo the building. We identify those resources. And then the hardest part is figuring out who in the community or what group in the community is going to own or operate these new amenities. And we get them to work. So we create this full action plan for them so they can do that work in that town. The larger picture, of course, is how do we attract millennials to move to these towns? And the answer for the past 10 to 15 years has been through incentives. Our belief is, at least this happens a lot in America, I think in Canada. But in America, the typical economic development model is to offer as many incentives as possible to a company to get them to move to your town to create as many jobs as possible. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But the problem is that today, it doesn't matter how much money you offer a company. What matters is, does your town have the workforce that they can hire from? And we just saw this with the big Amazon sweepstakes that happened 2 weeks ago. All of these cities across North America were competing and offering all sorts of different tax incentives and other incentives to do it. New York and DC won. They offered incentives that they didn't necessarily offer as many or more than all the other cities. Simply, these places had the workforce and other things like fiber that Amazon was looking for. But our belief today is that you're not going to get the companies by offering money. You need to have the people. And the myth in rural America is that there are no good paying jobs in rural America, and that's simply not true. The problem is that there's tons of jobs and good paying jobs. The problem is that there's not enough people to take the jobs. So instead of incentivizing companies, we need to incentivize people. And sometimes that means literally paying them to come to these towns. There's examples of this all over the place. Right now in rural Vermont, if you move to rural Vermont, you don't even have to work there. If you choose to live in rural Vermont, you can work remotely. The state of Vermont will give you $10,000 tomorrow. If you move to Tulsa, Oklahoma, The city of Tulsa will give you $10,000. If you take a job at BNSF Railroad in Kansas or Missouri, they will give you a $25,000 signing bonus. If you choose to go to a dozen different states in America, you can get free land if you choose to build on it. There's all sorts of incentives that can be created to lure people in. And what I like to do is figure out how can these smaller communities create these incentives specifically for creatives and entrepreneurs to lure them in. So giving them some kind of housing subsidy or actual cash to get them to come. And it comes with strings. It means you have to stay for at least 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years. There's a great program in Iowa called FIND, which stands for Fulfilling Iowa's Need for Dentists. Rural areas have a shortage of dentists. So what we did is we figured out a $100,000 incentive for a dentist, fresh out of dental school. Typically, most of them use those dollars to pay off down their student loans. The way we got it was that the local community had to raise $25,000. Delta Dental, an insurance company, put in another $25,000. The state of Iowa puts in $50,000 as a match. It's $100,000. But the strings are, if you take this money and move to one of these communities, you have to stay for at least 5 years. If you leave under 5 years, you have to return the money. So far, we're in year 6 of this. There's been 42 or 43 dentists who have done this. Only one has left in those 5 years. The key now that we're in year 6 to see how many of them are actually going to stay past those 5 years and really make these places their homes. But this is how we need to attract them, not to mention providing the amenities that a bigger community, a bigger city has. We can offer them at a scalable level. You're not going to have 1,000 restaurants, but you could have 10 really good ones. You could have a brewery. You can have a cultural center, a live music venue, all these things that I've been mentioning. And the key to remaking our main streets, especially when it comes to retail, and Jean-Marc was talking about this, the localized version, the key to this is something we call touch services. You can't, if you're going to create a retail store in a rural community and the same products that store sells can be found at Walmart or Amazon, it's unlikely that that group is going to be successful. And that stinks, but that's the truth today. So what can we do to repopulate these buildings that are sitting available and vacant in these small towns? We need to create touch services. You can't get a haircut online. You can't get your nails done online. You can't go to dinner online, at least not yet. You can't get medical services online. You can't have a cultural experience online. These are the things that we can put onto our main streets in smaller communities, which fantastically help make these communities more unique, which helps attract more people. So that piece plus incentives, plus a very strong marketing campaign is how we can rebuild rural communities throughout North America. The last piece I want to mention on all of how this is operating is this. I agree with all the technologies that Jean-Marc was talking about. One more I wanted to offer is 3D printing of buildings. This is the biggest reason I work for an engineering company, is because I can't figure this out because I'm a theater person. But these communities, 3D printing of buildings is happening all across the world, but it's not happening in North America. And it's not happening largely because of zoning and code issues and unions, because people are only trying to do it in urban areas. But in rural communities, more often than not, these codes either don't exist or haven't been updated in a long time, or they can be changed with a few city council meetings. And it's much cheaper today to print a building out of concrete than it is to build a normal stick build. And that, I think, is a long-term solution to solving our housing crisis. So I'll stop there for now.
Yeah. Zach, completely agree with all of this. I mean, in a lot of our communities in the mountain areas, we do have, where's my video? We do have an affordable housing solution, and everybody's talking about it. It's never ending. But it gets back to the point where we're not getting the right solutions in our hands. Even though they exist around the world, you can 3D print the building, and then that pops up in your Facebook feed, and like, why can't I 3D print this building here? What's the deal? It's the organization, the existing organizations and zoning that says you can't do that here. well, what if we created some experimental zones in our communities, sandboxes, just like we do in the web business? Cities like Detroit have built these pink zones where literally they're experimental zones. Detroit was built for 2 million. It only has 1 million. So there's a lot of room to play. But kid you not, we do have a lot of land on planet Earth. And what we're facing right now with these so-called real estate issues should no longer be once people are able to be spread out a little bit further with the electric and soon to be autonomous vehicle, and then a wireless fiber internet transmitted in different directions. So the ability, as we know, and what happened in the past with setting up suburbia, the ability for young people to kind of move a little further out, to kind of start from scratch, is all the rage these days. This is why they've flocked to mountain communities or flocking to rural areas, encountering the same operational difficulties they do in the big cities. So we can't just, I don't believe we should just, hang our hats on incentives to come to our existing framework. We should actually set up what could be the future to them and start opening up the channels for them to recreate this online in collaboration with some of their peers and some of the best solutions out there. So it's giving them a valuable source of information for new types of housing, a valuable source of information for new markets. There are 1,000 jobs that can be learned online for free in the space of a couple of months, and then all of a sudden young people earning $100,000 in the third or sixth month of being on the job. But this is not aware. This is not being made aware to our younger population. And so the keys to opening up our communities is opening up the information on the global level, getting out of the mountain bubble and into a framework where we say as a community and as a region or as a global population, here are some of the most important verticals or some of the most important markets you could be learning, rather than the cursory blog and the marketing campaign that gets you into one thing or the other, right? So it's a combination of things. You're right, Zach, I totally agree. The incentive for them to come, but then also the tools of which they can seize the moment and achieve what they really want out of life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's one of the, you touched upon another piece of this, is that having the right leadership in place in these communities to take these ideas and actually execute them. There's a million ideas out there, and we see 100 comp plans that are created for these towns all the time, but very seldomly do they actually execute the ideas because they don't have the tools to do it.
Yeah.
Guys, we've got sort of a comment question here from a couple of our attendees. I'll just read this one off. I think we need to have our own low-cost building options that are like, quote, forward to the past, end of quote, that help people build for themselves, have support to do it right, as Jean-Marc says, using our local resources. Log houses like my grandparents built, little creative houses like so many Kootenay houses. Zach, we're both speaking to you from a region of British Columbia called the Kootenays. And build in the efficiencies that old places don't have. And then another attendee weighs in and says, and I want to have communities of those that have a top quality tech hub for each one, plus lifestyle, including gardening, composting, trails from your backyard, beaches across the road. Any comments on those comments from either of you?
Yeah, I can jump in. I totally agree. I mean, we need to get more creative with the way that we're building homes, building buildings in general. I think, and largely the reason why a lot of this doesn't happen is due to codes and due to zoning, which, as Jean-Marc was saying before, those zones that were set up in Detroit is a good example. We can do that in rural communities often much faster than we can in urban communities because of the size of it and the scale of it. So we can change those laws to allow for things like this. When it comes to things like quality tech hubs and all of that, I agree, we want those things. The biggest thing that we have to do to create that, though, is we have to pull in the talent pool before those tech companies are going to come. Now, ideally, we can pull in some really innovative tech entrepreneurs that start their businesses there and they're super successful, and we can help incentivize those people. But we need to create that hub first before all of those people are going to come. Before all those companies are going to come.
Well, Jean-Marc, you and I know that Kimberley, British Columbia is taking a very exciting step in that direction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Inspired in part by the examples of Bend, Oregon, and I believe it's Provo, Utah. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, Kimberley has the Kimberley Outdoor Alliance, and innovation hubs are appearing all over the place, and some struggle with the concept. Do you build a building and then put in co-working and attract young people, and they will come, meaning they being the people and the solutions, or do you build the infrastructure or creative programming first? In Revelstoke, we've built a co-working space that is, a mini incubator, and then a program called Startup Revelstoke, which is assisting entrepreneurs with coaching and online programming. So you need these two together. Kimberley Outdoor Alliance is focused on outdoor activities and outdoor innovation, really great. So there's actually a niche. They're targeting that. They're going out to companies around the world to say, hey, look, this is what we've got in terms of asset, environmental, and infrastructure, and young people that are here, and they're putting it down into the program. But we're still years and years of setting up these programs and refining the programs. So young people have come to our communities in large chunks for decades. I mean, people have always moved to the rural communities, and they get there and they're like, okay, how do I execute on this? Yeah, for sure, it's bringing them together in one space, which is just through the process of collisions and of osmosis and conversation in one space is really helpful to kind of create new innovation. But then ultimately, what are those tools that are going to, send it skyward, plugged into the regional investment co-op here in the Kootenays to access local capital, and for the entire region to fully understand what these top growing startups out of Kimberley are that need support from other parts of the region and the world. So they totally need to be plugged in to the rest of the world, which is what they're setting up right now by inviting some of the bigger companies to come and experience this with already this network that is completed.
Zach, anything to add to that? Yeah, and I'm seeing some of these other comments here that I can touch on as well.
Yeah, please.
Great comments. So I'll start with this one here that says that my premise is bucks the trend of more people moving to urban areas, which is correct. That does buck the trend. What we're seeing, it's not like we're going to have more people moving to rural than there are moving to urban. That's not going to happen. There will be more people moving to urban. I can't say always, but probably always. But what we're seeing is a higher population leaving the big million-plus urban areas and moving to the smaller urban areas like Winnipeg, like Tulsa, like Boise. These places are seeing a population growth right now. Is it a higher growth rate than Toronto or New York City? No, nor will it be. But we're seeing more people come right now. So how do we increase that? And why are those places successful? They're doing all the things that we've been talking about this whole time. They have these tech innovation hubs. They have maker spaces. They have all these pieces. But the only reason why they have them is because they created a plan and built them. They had the infrastructure to do that. They didn't have that infrastructure 20, 30 years ago. Nobody was moving to Boise, Idaho 20 years ago. It just wasn't happening. It was only if you were from there. Today, people are, because they decided to build out these pieces. What I'm advocating for in rural communities is exactly that. The person from Salmo who's just been elected as a counselor, which is terrific, and this person says they're going to set up maker spaces and men's sheds and community spaces. That's great, and I hope that you have a plan for that. And that's what I'm looking for in these communities. Some communities have those plans, and most don't. We come in and help make those plans and help build that out. And so the big question is, do these communities have the right leadership in place? This is something that is a controversial comment, especially here in America, and I think definitely in Canada. I was in Brandon, Manitoba 2 weeks ago, and they did not agree with me on this. Money is never the problem for any of these things. Money is never the problem. Money can be found. And especially when you look at the Canadian system is built upon more public dollars than private. And that's a wonderful scenario. Unfortunately, it's not sustainable. So what we have to do is figure out how to bring in the private sector to help subsidize and build a lot of these pieces. And it makes complete sense in that these companies will gain in their profits and whatever they're trying to do if they have more of a workforce. So what we do here in America is every project we build, whether it's a makerspace or a tech hub or anything like that, we always have a public-private partnership. I try never to have more than 20% of the dollars in whatever is needed come from public dollars. We have ways to access that private money. And that's something that I think the Canadian model should be looking at, particularly in smaller communities. So money's never the problem to do this. The problem is leadership. Does your community have the right leadership to not only see the future and want to move towards that, but do they have the perseverance to move in that direction? These things take a long time, years, and often leaders get discouraged. So the problem is leadership, regardless of the size of the community.
Yeah, Zach, you're right. It is the leadership, and what we've seen though time and time again is young people coming in trying to take the role of a leader in an antiquated system and getting frustrated, frankly. And it's very difficult, especially so every rural remote community, very different aspirations on growth patterns. Some want to grow exponentially, others are like no more, we've got enough in our paradise community here, it can't support it, right? So the leaders aren't there. They need to be coached into a position, and when they do get into the position, they're faced with the same construct that was, and it grinds people down. And we've seen that in BC in the last elections. Waves of young people got in and now have gotten out of leadership roles and on to other things. Now that's just part of the gig economy. Also to consider is we do have to kind of get people swapping in. Gone are the days where you had these big companies that would last for all of eternity, including our governments. We need to start moving people around inside of government walls, inside of leadership positions, and we need to start using the tools to empower people from home to become a leader. And that's truly the process of open government, is when we can finally empower our creative leaders, not administrative leaders. Nobody wants to sit around in a council meeting and do administration. They want to be empowered creative leaders, millennials especially, to supply the needed input to take us to the next level. And it is super critical that we plug in with technology, considering the fate of humanity with AI in 10 to 15 years, that we program this machine together. So that is the thing. I agree in the leadership. What form of leadership? How many leaders are at the table, and how are they actually funneled through the system is a big crazy recipe.
Gentlemen, we're almost out of time, so I'd like to round this off with a final question, sort of a general question. I think that one of the things that shines through from this very stimulating conversation and discussion is that there are, as you just said, Jean-Marc, as many ideas as to what the future should be for our small rural communities as there are those communities. But having said that, one of the things that we see quite often here at the BC Rural Center is that someone is doing something really interesting, very successful, quite exciting. And another community 100 kilometers away, never mind 1,000 kilometers away, is facing essentially exactly the same challenge. and has no idea, because it has no connection to or with that other community, what they did. So I know both of you in the work that you do have been involved in and are currently involved in some very interesting initiatives. What are your ideas? We'll start with Zach and then you, Jean-Marc, in terms of a means of allowing communities, including some of the thought and action leaders who've joined us on today's webinar, to connect with one another. You know, is there a possibility of forming some kind of information alliance so that we can support one another, stand on one another's shoulders for the betterment of rural communities everywhere? Zach?
Well, it's a great question, and something we've started doing when we create our action plans for these communities. Even though we keep them short and easy to read, they're still not getting read by the larger community. They get read by the people who commissioned us to do the work. And so in order for there to be buy-in, the whole community has to read it, or as you're presenting, the people that want to do this across many communities need to understand this information. So we don't create the paper plans anymore. Now we build websites. Whenever we finish an action plan, we build a website for our community, then we publish these websites online for anyone to see. So a lot of this information can be found there. And I do think creating a better online community for this information is a very strong idea. There are thousands of us across North America that are trying to do this work. The more of us that we can get reading about what we're doing and actively engaging and being able to ask quick questions like, hey, I'm in a town of 2,000 people. We need to change our codes to do X. Is there an example of this that you've seen before? Hopefully one of us has that information and can share it. So I think creating that online community, whoever takes that charge, Randy, maybe you, fantastic situation. I'd love to be a part of that.
Okay, Jean-Marc?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's pretty clutch, and I think there are a lot of tools out there that are coming to light. In Canada, we did a Smart Cities Challenge. It was a national crowdsourcing campaign for solutions on smart city technology. And that's all coming to light. Some communities have got funding to deliver on technologies to improve municipal government. Others have at least got some ideas starting to circulate around in different ways, but really is harvesting all of that. I think pretty quickly here, we're going to see some really bright shining stars across North America and the world. Keep your eyes peeled on Scandinavia and parts of Europe, which will accelerate with that. On the local level, even in BC, we've got some technology that's been around forever. A company called PlaySpeak out of Vancouver Island, citizen engagement tool. It's used for official community plan reviews and everything under the sun with regards to your community issues. And you can start to use these tools as an experiment for different issues or different projects. And then ultimately, I'm with Startup Canada, and we're building this, aggregating tools to build the ultimate entrepreneur program so that you can be self-serve wherever you are and start your business without the need of an individual by your side egging you on. And so these are the tools that are out there. Keep your eyes peeled. Read more about smart cities. There's a lot of great info that's circulating, and of course, the BC Rural Center is stepping up and going to be delivering some great content with you, Randy, and onwards.
Okay, thanks for that, Jean-Marc. Yeah, I think certainly there's a role that we've been trying to play, and I think we can increase that role in the months and the years ahead in terms of being sort of a clearinghouse for this kind of really exciting information, and also an enabler, bringing folks who've got a question into contact with folks who might have an answer. So listen, I just want to wrap up by thanking both of our presenters, Zach Mannheimer, who joined us today from Iowa, and Jean-Marc Flamme, who joined us today from the Kootenays here in British Columbia, for a very stimulating conversation on a question that's of huge importance to all of us who live in rural places. For those of you who attended, thank you so much from across British Columbia, elsewhere in Canada and the United States. We really appreciate you taking the time from your busy schedules to join us. I hope you enjoyed this exchange. I'm going to now take this video and try and edit out a couple of the glitches and then place that on our website and push it out via social media so that those of you who attended can have that video version of today's webinar, and then of course share it with your rural friends and families out there as well. And finally, let me just remind you once again to be sure and visit our website, which is www.bcruralcenter.org. Sign up for our monthly e-newsletter where you'll find links to a lot of really useful information. And like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and share your successes and your concerns with us. We'd love to hear from you. So on behalf of all of my colleagues at the BC Rural Center, again, Zach, Jean-Marc, thank you so much for this stimulating conversation. And to all of you who attended, thanks a lot and have a great upcoming December.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.